Well, hello, friends. I would like to invite you to a new webinar at Astrology University called Uranus, the Complex Relations of Earth and Sky with Jason Holley. And Jason is with us today, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about what to expect at the webinar. So thanks so much for joining us today, Jason.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So I know you put this together because you've been doing a longer series for us. You did a series for us on the signs and myth, and then you just started going through some of the planets with Venus. But I wonder if you could just tell folks a little bit about what we might be missing out on by not including the mythological perspective of Uranus as we're reflecting on its meaning.
Yeah, of course. You know, I, the interesting thing about it is that with Uranus and Neptune, particularly, people have a lot of trouble seeing the connectedness between the myth and the way that we have experienced the astrological archetypes. And so, particularly with Uranus, which has a kind of tendency to clear things and make it empty, the mythological context actually can be really helpful to re-embed Uranus into a set of stories and not just see it as this thing that just strikes out of the blue. And as a result, it doesn't often get very complexly formulated. People are not always able to track what are these dynamics of change that Uranus brings. How can you work with that sort of experience of sudden change or interruption? And by bringing back the myth, we actually kind of do a favor to the planet itself. Like, in a way, by taking the mythic context away, we've fallen into the Uranian issue, right? Which tends to just blow context out. And, all of a sudden we're here. And it's sort of like, how do you tell your own story of a Uranus transit? Or how do you tell your own story of Uranus aspects in your chart? And so the things I see that usually happen with the astrologizing of Uranus, one is to do that, just to go into like a sort of wide blanking out. And the other is sometimes to reach for other stories. So, for instance, the Prometheus myth is often connected. There are even people who have suggested that the planet is not named correctly. I find, however, that the Uranus mythology that the Greeks give us is very powerful for getting a bigger picture and a more nuanced picture of how the planet acts and how we can mediate all these big changes that Uranus brings. Uranus is one of the oldest of the gods in the Greek stories, and so in the webinar, one of the things that we will be focusing on is these stories, and particularly these different ages of Greek myth that Uranus is a part of. And particularly, we'll be talking about the relationship of Uranus and Gaia, Uranus was said to have been born from the Earth, born from Gaia, and Uranus was star spangled. The images of Uranus that we have always show him covered in stars. He is the celestial night sky, and so really understanding his birth from Gaia, their marriage, and then also his eventual sort of separating himself apart from the Earth and beginning to, for instance, disown his own children, push them back into the earth. So what we'll be looking at is those stories and how they describe what Uranian process is. We'll be also looking at, for instance, who were these children that Uranus was both birthing, but then also not allowing to kind of reach their full potentials and possibilities. And as always with myth, and Greek myth particularly, what we know is that it doesn't typically say, here's what you should do, right? It's not an allegory. It's really often presencing what are the dilemmas, what are the things that tend to occur, so that once we have the myth, we can get into the stories and then we can dream them in different ways, right? We can move them in different ways in our lives. And the stories offer ways in to do that, things like the Asclepions, where you laid down on the earth, received her dreams, saw them reflected in Uranus's sky. It's like the dreaming earth and the reflecting sky, and a lot of different ways that the Greeks mediated this situation, because they did take a really clear understanding that the tendency of Uranian process is to detach and separate, and then from there it almost doesn't ever let anything be born, right? It's not so much a constructive energy as it is a disruptive energy. But again, if we start to understand that as a dynamic of earth and sky, and we start to re-embed Uranus, help Uranus remember its connectedness to earth and its mother, so to speak, and then begin to actually creatively work with the progeny of Uranus in our lives. So we'll be looking at this, we'll be looking at the stories from the Greek myth. We'll also be looking, the discovery century of outer planets is often a very potent way to see how they have shown up. And so in the 18th century, when Uranus is discovered, we have all these revolutions, discovery of electricity, so many things, which really are, again, have almost legendary mythic qualities. And we also see those spots as almost the beginning of the current ecocide that we're in, right? That we have sort of followed Uranus up into the sky, detached from Earth, and we have a bit of a mess. But the question is, how do you also take the benefits of Uranus, right? Uranus has brought in so many things, or possibilities at least. So how do you create this grounding context to have a dialectic again between sky and earth, have a dialectic between mind and body? And so that's what we'll be looking at. I'll be drawing on work with people that I've done in psychotherapy and readings, where we really look at how to re-embed the planet into stories, so that it doesn't just feel like you're being grasped by something. I always like that planet word, graha, in the Sanskrit, in Jyotisha. Like, they're called grahas, which means to grab. They grab you. And so once grabbed, what do you do? What do you do with that? And again, the stories really offer a lot of that recontextualization. And one of the points of this webinar, the series with the planets, is really begin to experience your own chart as an inner ecosystem, right? With all these creatures they are themselves embedded in story. And even if they forget, like Uranus forgets, but they're embedded in story, and they all need habitat in your life, right? Everything, Uranus needs a place. There needs to be a place where you can go to the sky. But again, how do we work with that creatively? And that's really where the stories will be of help, and the myths. So that's what I want to bring in this experience. And particularly to ask, like, how do the personal planets deal with their contacts with this potent, being?
Beautiful. Well, thanks for that, Jason. One of the things I love about this series, as you've been doing it, is in every talk you cover this to some extent, but people sometimes, or students learning astrology and hearing about the mythological context, often wonder, how do I actually incorporate that into the work, not just in my understanding, but as I'm communicating that to others. And you always give a lot of practical and useful information on that level. So if you're somebody who's been kind of struggling with how to incorporate the mythological perspective, any one of these sessions with Jason, I think, is a wonderful doorway into that. And I know this one will be too. So thanks for bringing that into the material as well, Jason. Well, if you would like to sign up for this webinar, head over to astrologyuniversity.com/events, where you can find it listed on our event calendar. And if you are tuning into this video after we've already broadcast it, we have the recording available for download. So all you have to do is search for it using the search field on any page of the website. You can type in Uranus. We have quite a few talks on Uranus, but this will be one of them. Might be a little bit faster to just type in Jason's name, Jason Holley, and you'll find all the webinars that he offers for us here at Astrology University. And if you have any trouble finding it, just email our help team, help@astrologyuniversity.com, and they will hook you up. Well, thanks so much for taking time out today to chat with me, Jason. I can't wait to see the webinar.
Yeah, great. Me too.
All right.